Have you guys ever seen my bloody slippers?
Happened to my
Oh, they're coming.
Exercise some more restraint as far as what
Damn, I missed that code thing.
Shall we?
Madam Mayor, it's 6 o'clock.
Good evening. I'd like to call this Thursday, July 25th, City Commission Budget Work Session number 3 to order and ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mayor Pam Triolo,
Here.
Vice Mayor Andy Amoroso.
Here.
Commissioner Scott Maxwell,
Here.
Commissioner Omari Hardy,
Aki.
Commissioner Herman Robinson.
Here.
Thank you.
If everyone would please rise for the pledge, led by Commissioner Maxwell.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Updates, future action, direction, work session number 3. The city manager usually does an introduction.
Where is the city manager? Talking with
City manager.
constituents.
Okay. Bruce, would you like to come up and lead the discussion?
Yep. Thanks for coming in, Bruce.
Since you're the money man. Are you going to be doing the introduction? We're live.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
We're live. Would you say the pledge?
Yeah, you missed it.
Did you have an introduction? Did you have an introduction for this, or did
For the record.
We can go right into Mike and Burton, who is here with Stantec, and you're quite familiar with their process and the modeling. Tonight we're going to be looking at the electric utility fund. So, Mike, if you want to take it from there.
Sure. Thanks, Mayor and Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here again, and always love coming back to Lake Worth Beach now.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah. What you see, let me see if I can get this where I can. What you see on the boards there, I don't know what's the best place for you to look. It's kind of a baseline look at the electric utility with the O&M only, without any capital, just so you can see what's going on. And Ed, I might want you to comment about that a little bit, because I think you wanted to kind of share a message with the commission about that, and you can either use this. Thought there was going to be one up there.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
is there any way we could make this a little bit larger on the screen by eliminating the white space on the right? Is that possible?
You can make it larger so you get it where you don't have the bottom.
There you go.
That's much.
Or turn
Thank you.
around.
Thank you. I'm not turning around. That hurts.
It's right there.
Point of order, everyone, dude.
Okay, Ed Liberty, Director of the Electric Utility here at Lake Worth Beach. Okay, so this slide is looking strictly at O&M, and particularly down in the lower left-hand corner, what we're referring to as working capital fund. What this is showing is the improvements that we've been making in O&M, the additional revenues that we've created, and the reductions in costs. Things that we did over the last year and a half plus, to decrease our wholesale power costs, decrease our discretionary spend, create some new revenues from, for example, a sale of the gas capacity, the effort on renewing the pole attachment agreements, those types of things that have been adding more revenues, and of course, some growth that's occurred in the service territory. So it's showing that from an O&M point of view, we're doing much better and turning things around.
I might point out that there's a relationship between the middle graph and the graph on the left, and it's a lot like managing your household finances. On the middle graph, the black bar are the cash in, and the orange bar is all the cash out, including O&M. O&M is the blue dotted bar, and between the blue and the orange bar represents capital spending. And so as long as the black, I'm saying bar, they're lines, as long as the black line is above the orange line, you're building up reserves over in the left graph. And then when they cross in the out years, which they do, then you're using, you're funding that gap with the use of reserves. But for 5 years, just O&M wise, you are on a positive projection there. This does not include any capital at this point. And the other thing that the staff was wanting us to show you was the potential reduction in the transfer to the general fund by $300,000 a year for 7 years, so that the utility fund isn't burdened with that $300,000 anymore. And we can show you that, and people can discuss it. Ed probably has some thoughts, and maybe Bruce too about that, but it'll get bigger again in just a second. So by reducing that cost by $300,000, you can see we have a positive cash flow throughout the whole period on the O&M. So it gives us a better ability to fund capital when it comes time to bring capital in, which we'll do in just a moment. Now, there would be some issues on the general fund side because it would get us less revenue in. And so I think staff is still working through those issues there and what the solutions over there would be, but it affects both funds.
Commissioner Hardy?
Yes. So, to what extent can we expect our competitor FPL to raise rates in the future?
Well, I just preface my comments by saying my crystal ball is blurry in that regard.
Sure.
They're certainly making every effort they can to keep their rates where they are. They do have a major item which has to do with a dispute with regards to how their income tax reductions will be handled. It's currently under, I'd say, it's in litigation, and they've had a favorable ruling on the part of the Public Service Commission, I believe, to allow that money to be used to replenish their storm fund as opposed to going to reduce rates. Should that be contested successfully at higher levels, it's possible that could be reversed and they could reduce their rates. But on the other hand, they're also, I'm sure, I don't have the details of their program, but they also have a very large capital program, and I'm sure their O&M is going up as well. So should they have to adjust rates, they may have other things that they want to bring into their rates that are currently not in their base rates or in their rate base. So it's really hard to predict where they are. It would be, or where they're going. It would be hard for me to believe that they're going to go up significantly. But as every utility, they're sure they're facing increased operating expenses and increased debt service as they roll out their capital plans to improve their level of service.
Okay. For now, that's what I have.
Vice Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. I know, Madam Mayor, I think you'd probably prefer that we get through the presentation before we do questions, but this is a real quick one, and that is, with this model up here showing a reduction of $300,000 contributed to the general fund, what is the total contribution currently to the general fund?
I believe that's about $4.8 million, and that will vary. And I'll let you folks give the specific number.
We can get it right here.
Okay, 4.8.
There you can see it going down by 300 a year for 7 years.
In 2022.
Starting in 2020. No,
Sorry.
starting in 2020.
Started in 2020. Transfers out. The 300,000 starts in 2020. So in 19, you're transferring 4,836,000. In 20, it's 4,584,000, 4,002,000. So that comes to the reduction of 300.
Okay.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Commissioner Robinson?
Well, I was just saying, transferring the burden, eliminating one burden is creating a burden on the general fund then, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So, and I don't want to interrupt, but the poll revenue, is that on par? Are those long-term contracts? Are we competitive? Can we overcharge?
They previously were not, but with the assistance of outside counsel at Torsivia, we have renegotiated new rates going forward, which are very competitive in the Florida market. We have surveyed other municipal utilities to understand the rates that they're paying, and the new rates that we're getting are, I'm not going to say the highest in the state, but it's much fairer than it was, and we continue.
What happens if we aren't competitive? What are the consequences of being the most expensive?
Well, they're very difficult agreements to negotiate with the carriers. And the longer we delay reaching a rate is the longer we delay beginning to collect. So the rates that we've negotiated, we believe are fair. They're mutually acceptable to both parties going forward, and they do have mechanisms in there down the road to increase them. But the more important thing there is that we get accurate poll counts and we keep up with it, unlike what we may have done in the past where we hadn't done poll surveys for many years. So it's about having the right poll count, having a fair rate, and managing to that number.
City Manager?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I apologize. I've got cold medicine going around my head, so I'm going to ask staff. Can you clarify when it's $4.8 million that's transferred over, that does not include other charges and fees that come over to the general fund? And do you have those numbers on the top of your head?
It does not include the administrative transfer.
The indirect costs, which is
We
about
have that number in here too.
1.8, and was there?
8 million.
So technically, when you talk about the 4.8 million, it is loosely you want to call it the profits that get transferred over, retained earnings. It should be retained to some degree, but right now it's propping up the general fund still.
So as would be normal even in the investor-owned utility world, where the individual utilities generate earnings, revenues, gross margins in excess of their costs, some portion of it is retained and reinvested in the business, and other portions go up to the parent company. It's also quite common for enterprises that have multiple businesses within them to contribute to their share of the common or shared expenses of the corporation, whether it's legal or HR, benefits, those types of things, procurement, those functions which benefit all of the businesses that are centralized. So we make the contribution not only to the general fund of basically our profits, if you will, but also we pay our share of the shared services, and there's some other places as well where we make some contributions. But the issue here is that what we'd like to do is begin to decrease the amount that we put in the general fund and put that money into the capital program that we're rolling out. So, it's not like we get to take all that money home, right? It goes back into the infrastructure plan and improving reliability. That's the purpose of that.
I think, Ed, one of the questions that I have for you would be, just as my own thoughts, beliefs, feelings on this, one of the things from, when I got here was we wanted to do a couple of things. We wanted to get at rate parity so that we could be competitive with our only other real competitor in the marketplace, because people had perceived, for years in the older days, they had, called the electric utility the cash cow, and we were milking the cash cow, and we were doing this and that, and the rates, that's why the rates are so inflated in this. And I think that, our work to create parity and to get within the range of FP&L was to say, okay, this is this, but as an electric utility, you're required to take, whether or not we had FP&L or whether we were operating, there's always a percentage or a charge that we would get to have that operating in our community as well. What is the percentage? Like, what is the comparison between what Lake Worth takes as a portion for our general fund in comparison to what that franchise fee would be, or whatever you'd call it? Is that the correct? Would that be the correct termination? Franchise fee would be if you were an independent. Is it similar, close, far distance?
The contribution to the general fund is greater than what a franchise fee would be. Franchise fees in this area, and not unusual, would be probably around 6%, depending on which particular community you look at. They vary by community.
Say Green Acres.
I think that's in the range of about 6%. Off the top of my head, when we did our benchmark or for the purpose of doing rate parity, we assumed that the franchise fee would be 6%.
Okay, and what does that work out to monetarily?
I haven't done the exact calculation on the percent of our revenue that's going to the general fund.
We can do a 6% calculation on the revenues here.
We believe
If it was a private utility, you would, of all the assets that you own, if they were private, you'd also be getting ad valorem revenues off of them too. So,
Right. So yeah. So whatever. If you were to factor in apples for apples, I don't want to. I know it's hard to do that, but or at least a ballpark kind of figure. Are we in several million apart, a million apart, several?
Madam Mayor,
I mean, we've always wanted to wean the general fund. We always wanted to wean the general fund off of the needs of the electric utility to prop it up. There's been argument about that. I shouldn't say we've always. There's been a battle over that, whether or not it's there to create a situation, but we've also wanted to be healthy as an organization without the use of those funds.
Madam Mayor,
Throwing a lot of things out there today.
well, And it's an important thing to go back and understand and discuss in the business model, because the general fund and the utility funds, and specifically the electric utility, are so inextricably interrelated and linked that you can't talk really about one without the other, because they are. But in the case of the franchise fees, just very loosely, high level, we came up with the $300,000 a year over 7 years to get us down to about half of what's being contributed now, which is roughly a 6% figure.
Okay.
Okay, but it doesn't take into account the property taxes and different things that a utility may or may not have in different degrees within the city. So back several years ago, when you started on the efforts to change where we were heading, there was an appreciation that if we fixed the city's issues and problems and made it less disincentives to come here, that there would be a corresponding influx of investment and people moving in, units being built. Fast forward 5 years, it hasn't happened at the rate that we had expected. And so that ratcheting down correspondingly on the general fund, and to be honest, there have been increases in our valuation in the ad valorem side, and sometimes we've led the county, but it's a percentage based on coming from where we had dropped below, we're $900 million in value. And it's just not been enough to keep up with increases that we've seen in the general fund, whether it's, and you've done a great job negotiating with the sheriff, but 1 or 2% is still a lot of money. You have health insurance costs, you have union contract costs, and those are far outpacing the growth you're seeing in taxable valuation. So it's creating these pressures on the general fund.
And also creating a more competitive workforce and raising the salary levels and raises. And
there's a lot of things that, and unfortunately, that's where we're probably going to spend a lot more time in the coming year, having a conversation about fixing the general fund, because it's where the dysfunction is. To Ed's credit and to where you've taken the electric utility, remember when you started really getting into the nuts and bolts of your electric utility, the business model for their budgeting process was they took all the costs that they had and that staff put together and overtime, whatever it was, and they piled it into a budget number. And then you set the rate. And by having that turned on its head and saying, you know what, we need to look at focusing on the exercise of trying to hit the market value, it greatly increased the efficiency and effectiveness of the budgeting process within the electric utility. And when Ed got here, even much more so, negotiating with the OUC contract, dealing with overtime issues. And it's become a much more lean and profitable entity because of that exercise. Whatever you think about hitting rate parity, it took their budgeting process and turned it on its head to where it gave it that order. Let's make this lean competitive. And it is. It's just not enough to carry some of the debt service and still be propping up the general fund, which hasn't. Its fortunes haven't improved in the same way. Does that make sense?
well, I think it's fair to say though too, just in retrospect, we did that to every department.
Correct.
We can't. We used to
And
go out
these-
a budget from.
these were the
you
big
had
boys.
this much. Now we came in and says, no, we need to do these things, and how much
Right.
does it cost to do those things?
And as
So
you
I know it's difficult and challenging. Trust me.
it's bedeviling at best. And we.
I want your rates to go down, but I also want you to stop giving money to the. It's like we're,
So the direction has
oxymoron.
been to Ed to improve reliability, which it doesn't matter what you pay for electrons if you can't get them. And he's identified a program that's pretty impressive, and he'll talk some more about that. And to stay competitive, because obviously we don't want to get back into that disincentive of I don't go to Lake Worth and cause. So he's doing a great job balancing that. It's not something that we believe can be done without addressing the general fund conversation. And that's what you're seeing reflected in there.
and I just want to know, Ed. I didn't hear anything on the news tonight about the fact that our power was on when 24,000 people were outside. Commissioner Robinson.
I question whether our intent is to take zero from the electric,
No.
okay, because it's our investment, and I would expect some profit to come back to the general fund. So that's not a goal.
Madam Mayor, that's clearly not the intent.
Okay.
There is profit
Well,
that you
Sort of,
deserve to invest back in the community,
yeah.
but it's close to, maybe, I would say, close to double what it should be. Is that a fair statement?
Well,
Guys,
so leads me
Yeah.
to the question of if I'm investing in FP&L or investing in Lake Worth Utilities, let's say, not as a property owner, but as an investment, just if broker was trying to sell me two different investments, which one would be?
Well, we're not for sale, and I believe
Well,
they're
but
better
we're
investment.
invested. We're invested, and I know it's a sort of a hypothetical, but would we be, as an investment wise, competitive?
Yes, it is, and I believe that the return on invested capital that we'll get
That's
will be significant here because every dollar of capital we spend is going to translate to marked improvement in reliability. So
So-
our projects are all prioritized, and I'm not questioning how other utilities spend their money, but we're very tightly prioritized around improving reliability, improving service level for customers.
and still returning an investment, and we need to sell the future.
Correct. It's never been my expectation that our contribution to the general fund would go to zero. I recognize that it needs to be there. Now, I don't think you'd ask any utility director who wouldn't give you this answer. Do I think I'm paying too much? Yes. What's the right amount? Something less than I'm paying today. But that number I recognize is never going to be zero, and you can decide what's fair. I recognize that we're a part of a greater enterprise, and we serve a greater good, which is a municipality in our service territory and the population. So
That's why I
those are
question
our
the
share.
burden of,
Right.
we're just passing a burden around.
Right, and we're in our particular case, to the extent that we're going to ask in our capital program, we're deploying capital, not to necessarily earn
Wisely.
earnings on it. We're deploying our capital in our poorest performing circuits, our areas of poorest reliability, and greatest return on investment in terms of reliability of the service provision to our customers and improving that customer experience.
And unlike impact fees, which we pay all over for jobs that happen all over the county, our money actually goes to us, to projects within our own community.
And
Right.
and commensurate, the types of things that we cut in terms of O&M were things that were least beneficial in terms of improving reliability to our customers. And then there were things that we flat out just renegotiated contracts for the same product at a lower price, for example, our wholesale power contract.
Yes,
And Madam Mayor, I just want to add and put it in the context of everything else that you guys have tackled in infrastructure. You've had to figure out how to unravel 40 or 50 years of benign neglect in your roads, your water, the missing fire hydrants. You've all dealt with those. It's the same thing here that we're dealing with in electric utility, except it's in the infrastructure of that transmission and distribution systems, the tie line, the museum of power generation that we own. That's the power plant. So you're doing the same kind of thing, a maneuver here. You're catching up. And it really takes us really getting all oars in the water to do this. It's a heavy lift.
but we're also growing up though too, because, unlike other cities that have been maintaining their general funds on other things within their communities and building their communities, we have been taking this money from the electric
It's been
utility.
propping up the city.
Yeah, I mean, we have to be grown-ups and we have to be able to stand on our own and be a healthy organization.
And it's going to drive us to some very serious discussions in the general fund, which leads to the vacancy, the lack of investment, and people moving here and building units and the things that we're hopefully on the verge of seeing some projects coming in that'll help round out the financial sustainability and feasibility of the city. And those are big things that are on your plate.
Yes, thank you. The $300,000 annual reductions, were those reductions modeled into what we saw in the general fund when we had a discussion on the general fund? Okay, so that's crucial. So when we had a discussion about the general fund, we didn't see $300,000 coming out of that fund annually going forward, which would obviously affect the decisions that we make about that. And I don't think that these two should be disconnected. That would be number one. Because that's really significant. I mean, you think about that, that's like, 2 police officers, 2 sheriff deputies, or, that's personnel. That's, a few code officers, right? Depending on whether or not they're contracted or, whether they're in-house. So that's very important. Those are raises, right, for our employees who, I would like for them to be more competitive. as far as what they get paid. The other thing is, when you said, before I ask my next question, when you said that some of the assets of the utility, if it were in private hands, would be taxed and we'd receive the value of that in ad valorem, we're not talking about utility easements. We're talking about like property that the utility owns, like where the power plant is or where
Correct.
that all that inventory is stored on Second Avenue. Okay. Right. Okay. Which is, be a reasonable amount, but it wouldn't be game changing given the amount of land our utility owns. Are there any properties that I should know about other than where the power plant is and where, you are on Second Avenue?
We do have substations.
Substations,
about
okay.
11 substations around
But
town.
some of those are not in, like the Hypoluxo substation.
I believe
That's not
that's-
in our taxing
correct.
jurisdiction.
Correct.
Okay.
But the vast majority of our substations are.
Okay.
We also do have some property, one we refer to as the Elizabeth Street substation property, which hasn't been used in many, many years as a substation, but we do own that substation, that property. We are considering
It's
getting
outside
rid of
the
that
city.
property. It's outside the city.
Okay.
We don't have a use for it in the immediate future, nor in our 5 or 10 or 15-year look. So we're strongly considering getting rid of that property.
Okay, and my next question would be, so, if I were to apply, which is why I asked the gentleman there to go back to that slide where the revenue is, so we got $56 million in revenue. If I were to apply that 6% to that $56 million, I'd get a franchise fee of $3.36 million, which is not 4.8. Did I get that right? It's 4.8 right now. So you have
Plus 1.8.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, plus the 1 point.
Right, plus as far as the franchise fee though,
And it will get close to that, though, when you have the reductions.
okay,
It gets down to
right,
2.7, which may be,
which is, what we're seeing represented there in those reductions is suffering and brain damage in the general fund, and so the question is, where do we get almost $1.5 million from? And when you think about that, when you think about, what our millage rate is and what we would have to generate in terms of actual taxable value, that's a lot just to replace what would be coming off. That doesn't even factor in the fact that in the general fund, we're going to see costs increase as our employees rightfully ask for more money, as benefits that we have to provide them increase, as the cost of just doing stuff, right? PPSO, the cost of buying vehicles for, code enforcement so they can, ride around. I've been in some of those pickup trucks, my gosh. But I've said it repeatedly. My feeling is, I know that we're 7 square miles, and I always like to connect this conversation we have about the electric fund to conversations that we have about other funds. I know we're 7 square miles, but what that means is we have to really allow people to use their land in ways that will increase taxable value. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so against FAR, for example. Square footage is how you determine the value of a why would we limit square footage? So again, we got to come up with a lot of taxable value. And I know that we've done a lot over the past several years, but looking at our budget every year, it doesn't appear to be enough to do some of the things that we would like to do. And so, those are my comments here.
Mr. Robinson?
When I asked about the difference between FP&L and us as a private company, is there a certain percentage that returns investment to FP&L? Can we not, certainly not go below the return to the general fund that FP&L returns to its customers or its investors? I mean,
Why not?
you know what I'm saying?
yeah,
I
let me-
don't know if I made myself clear, but
Let me try to answer it this way. I don't know the exact percentage of FPL's earnings that are retained within FPL versus what actually goes up to Next Era. However, what I can speak, generally speaking, in utilities, you would like to see your capital investment be reasonably close to your depreciation. So they would retain in the business enough to support their capital program at some debt to equity ratio that they might apply in their business. So Having said that, I don't know exactly what percentage of what their earnings are and how much of that goes to NextEra, how much is retained in the business. I don't have
Well,
that information.
can we agree that consensus or a policy that we don't continually keep milking or I can say that now the electric company is utility company is milking the general fund. I mean, well,
No.
No,
but we need
even in
to
this scenario,
have a balance.
We're talking about what's contemplated is a reduction in the contribution, not taking money out of the general fund. So the utility is going from 4.8 million down to, I'm going to say 4.5.
Commissioner Robinson, when a private utility regulated by the Public Service Commission, they're allowed a rate of return. That rate of return is typically made up of a weighted cost of capital. And the weighted cost of capital is the weighted average of the cost of their debt and the cost of their equity investment. Okay, the real earning to the company is that equity part. The debt is just simply pays their interest on their debt back.
Well, can we run our operation?
And those numbers, I don't know what it is for FP&L, and we can try to get you some ideas about that. But the cost of equity typically for private utilities is judged as a function of risk, other opportunities for the investor to make, and so on and so forth. And they typically will be somewhere in the 6 to 8 or 10% range, oftentimes. So,
Is that what we're talking? I question the economy of scale at 7 square miles versus,
We haven't done an effectively return on equity or return on invested capital.
we're not doing parallel. It's not based upon your equity investment. It's different. You asked that question, and so I'm not necessarily saying that we should parallel that part of how the private utilities work, because we're not an investor-owned utility. We're a government-owned utility, and the common practice for governmental-owned utilities is to either have if they have anything beyond the transfer for administrative services, which is your 1.8 million, it would be typically a payment in lieu of taxes, which we talked about, or a payment in lieu of franchise fees. And a few utilities now, mostly on the water side, are doing a pure return on investment type transfer, which is not, I wouldn't recommend going that way right now, but payment in lieu of taxes, payment in lieu of franchise fees are pretty common things that are done for locally owned utilities. So.
The other thing I would point out, you'd have to read a 10K and try to break out FPL from all the other stuff that NextEra does, but there's a capital base there, right? There's like a base of capital that's there in the event of their issues or what have you. And my understanding is that the electric utility just doesn't have that because it's not allowed to retain its earnings, right? So while I recognize that it would be very painful to, over almost any length of period, reduce the dependence of the general fund on the payouts from the electric utility that are over and above what it will receive in taxes and in a franchise fee, I think it's appropriate to go that direction. And I think as we try to provide a level of service with the electric utility that's on par with what our competitor would provide to people who do not live in this city or within our service area, rather, I think it's going to be essential because it makes Ed's job all the more difficult because he has to do more with less, with less of a base. So we have to figure out how to grow our tax base and how to make our acreage as productive as possible, given that we don't have much of it. And that's a challenge, but I don't think we've done as good a job on that front as we might have if we had been more aggressive and willing to have difficult conversations about land use within the city. We cannot be a city that wants to change without changing, right? Like we can't be a city where people want services the same way as they do in West Palm, but say we don't want to be like West Palm as far as what the built environment looks like. Well, that's where your tax dollars come from, right? So,
Vice Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. In my mind, this is how I look at the situation that we're in. And Mayor, you kind of touched on it earlier. We went through we made the decision to reduce our rates, and we knew that in doing so, it was going to impact the ability for the utility to continue to prop up the general fund in the way that it had in the past. So each of the last 6 or 7 years or 8 years, but we've been on this journey, the general fund has been, as the city manager said, all parties involved and all enterprise funds and all the funds of the city have had to sharpen their pencil over the years, and they've become a lot leaner and a lot meaner, and we should be very thankful for that. As I see the situation today, what we're talking about is the ability to allow the utility, now that they've done their part so far, that they are in a situation where they need to be able to buy, to go out and buy some money, do some capital projects. And if we don't do that, we're going to, be in a little bit of a trouble in terms of our infrastructure. And I guess what I'm trying to say is it's going to be painful, very painful. But as I look at the numbers and I think about some of the percentages that have been bantered about as far as franchise fees from other investor-owned utilities, I think we're going to be a lot closer in the end of this journey to what we would have received if we were serviced by FP&L. And again, I cannot overstate what caused this city to get into the bind that it was. Is because, in all due respect to our former elected officials, they didn't do a real good job, in my mind's eye, of managing the function. And it was so much easier for them to simply rely on the utilities by adding more, raising the rates, whatever they did over the years, to run the general fund. We're no longer in that position, and we're beyond that point of no return. It's time for us to, like the mayor said earlier, to grow up and move this city forward. The last thing I want to say, though, and this goes back to the city manager's comments earlier about us not realizing the investment that maybe we thought we would have seen by this time, is, and I've said this dozens of times before, we've not done a very good job of really telling the outside world about what's happened with our utility in terms of its rates and all that. And I had lunch with somebody today that said the same thing. And they themselves said, the city's not doing a good enough job telling our story. So just throwing that out there for us all to be mindful of, that we need to tell our story in every opportunity that we get. Every staff member in the city, should almost have a statement on a business card or something. When somebody goes there, you say, here you go. This is the truth. This is the reality. The other thing I want to say too, and then I agree with some of what Commissioner Hardy has expressed, and I've asked in various ways over the years, but we're going to start having some very serious conversations about the elephant in the room in terms of our city and how we're going to increase our property values, how we're going to attract investment. And with that, there's going to come a level of discomfort and things that we're going to have to uncover and things that we're going to have to talk about. And I think that it's time that we start having that conversation and trying to, do one little thing here or one little thing there. And I don't mean, Commissioner Hardy, no disrespect to some of your initiatives, but I think we need to look at a bigger comprehensive attack plan on what we're going to do. And I don't disagree with you on the floor area ratio. As time goes on, I learn more about it and the impacts of it. Understand the comprehensive plan that we're basically using today was initiated some 10 years ago. And, there were folks that were driving that bus at the time that had much different viewpoints or views on what they thought they wanted us to be when we grew up. So I won't belabor the point, but, we definitely need to, consider all factors and realize that we're not out of the woods yet. We got a long way to go. And we're just going to have to be having more direct conversations about specific issues that we have in the city and not avoid those conversations. Thank you.
Manager?
I just wanted to add, Madam Mayor, that this ratcheting down the relationship is intended to provide the electric utility the money they're going to need to invest back in the asset. And we focus on fixing the general fund, which you've been making comments on some ideas and concepts of how to do that. If you fix the general fund, it's a lot about bringing in customer base. and customer base is something that would help directly. So as we're successful in healing the city, as people move back into the city, as we see units come in, to give you a perspective, each residential customer of about 1,000 kilowatts usage is about a $400 to $500 pure profit, if you want to say, to the electric.
Gross margin contribution.
Thank you.
A year.
So, if we come to our, and we're looking at what we're short in units right now, because there are a lot of units technically on the books that people could come into the city and actually develop, and there's reasons why they don't. We need to delve into that. But, for every 2,000 plus customers, that's about $1 million to his bottom line. And so if we're short 7,500, that becomes our target in units that we want to see. Fixing the general fund side, because that'll add value to the tax revenues, but it'll definitely impact the profitability of the utilities, not just ed, but also water, sewer, and other ones that prop up the general fund as well. So they are related. Fixing the problems that we're having with investment will fix the customer base.
Yeah.
And can we get on? We'll move
Sure,
on with this, please.
Sure. Again, on the urgency front, okay, the fact that we have a $1.5 million difference between what the utility would be getting, right? If it were, between what the general fund would be getting if the utility were in private hands or not, that tells us that we need many, many more millions of dollars in tax base, not like tomorrow, but yesterday. And so the level of urgency needs to be extraordinarily high, and our willingness to have difficult conversations needs to be really, really high, because if we don't, we're going to continue to run into the same problems over and over again. The problems have improved, but their nature hasn't changed much over the years. The other thing is there a way that we could see in the general fund today what this $300,000 looks like, being that we did not see it the last time we looked at the general fund?
We do have that modeled, correct?
Could we,
Yeah,
could
we
we
can do
see
that
what that $300,000 reduction would look like?
It might take a minute just to get it up, but
Sure.
Do you want to do it? Can we continue with the presentation so he doesn't have to switch and then
it won't
bring
take
it up
but
at
a
the
minute.
end?
Or we can do it at the end. You want to do it?
Is there more?
You mind if he brings up a point, Madam?
No, go ahead.
So just want to follow up on a comment by Commissioner Maxwell in terms of promoting what we're doing and what we've achieved. We currently have in the procurement process a media relations, actually more of a public relations entity that's going to help us develop our messaging. So we reached out to the Florida Municipal Power Agency, and through them have been in conversations with the entity that they use to promote what they do. So what we're talking about doing is creating a much more consistent, targeted messaging campaign that speaks to the things that we're accomplishing and what we're doing to solve the problems that we have ahead of us, so that people don't happen to hear about what we're doing only because it was a press release that was reactionary to something that took place. It's more about having a consistent, targeted, purposeful messaging campaign that's a combination of either bill stuffers, press releases, annual reports, quarterly reports, newsletters to customers, and general communications. Again, all pointing outside, not internal. It's not to tell us what we're doing, because we know that every day. It's about to tell our customers and stakeholders. Stakeholders are also the realtors. They're people who think about moving here. It's other regulators, it's legislators, it's the community at large beyond just our service territory limits. So we have a good message to tell. We've told ourselves that message long enough now that we do believe it, and we're acting on it, we're following it. We need to share that with other people. So we're going to begin a process which will include workshops with the people in this room, and it'll include, I shouldn't say exclude, it will also include the external people who are stakeholders in this process, who play a role in messaging to the community and their various forums that they participate in. So we want to have
I've
our
heard that
message.
PR
out there.
stuff works.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Do you know any good
as
PR
well.
organizations?
I've been working with Clay, back to Clay days of trying to get some great PR, better electric utility.
We are in the process of retaining that person.
Okay.
We're working with procurement to get that done, and that process will kick off with a workshop at which all of you will be participating to help craft what you'd like to see in a messaging campaign, And then we'll be asking others who are stakeholders in our success or who have an interest in talking about our success, they would be invited to participate as well.
Can we continue?
Okay, well, what we have on the board here is the general fund model.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah, and if you look at the green, that graph right there with the green bars and the blue bars, the green bars was the last time, but it's with a $1 million reduction in cost starting in 2020.
Is that reduction annual, or is it a one-time
It's a
reduction?
one-time, but it stays. It
Okay.
doesn't happen over and over and over again.
Okay.
So it's a $1 million reduction, and the green bars represent that scenario. The blue bars are that scenario, but with the reduction of $300,000 of a transfer from the electric utility for 7 years. So you can see over on the right-hand side, the cash out, which is the orange bar, continues to exceed the cash in, and that's what's depleting the reserve balances. So the challenge on the general fund is, as you can clearly see, to either increase the revenues through growth and development, like you're saying, or reduce cost. I mean, you don't have much room on your millage, for one thing. I mean, you're right at 9, I believe, so. And they're
And
not.
I believe that millage rate too was set
Many years ago.
And at some point,
2007 or 6
yeah, I guess it's 2 millages. It's one with the fire.
in the MSTU.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So at some point, I mean, this model has the ability for us to go in and look at property value changes, new growth units at certain property values and different types of products. At some point, if you ever wanted to have a workshop to do that, we could do that to help you understand if you were able to develop whatever the vacant properties are at certain property levels, what would it do? And in some sort of a sequence time frame, what would it do to the revenues and how would it help that situation there? So.
I absolutely believe that that's the approach we should be taking. I know that lots of people, well, I shouldn't say lots of people, but I know there are some people who like to look at cities and see, what's your most productive acreage on like a per acre basis and break it out geographically and break it out by land use category. And I think we should definitely go in that very data-driven direction, because what we've been doing, while it has improved the situation, it hasn't achieved what we needed to achieve, because we're still having the same conversations over and over again, although the nature of the conversation becomes a little less dire every year. But that's not good. That's by the way, that shows us doing what we need to be doing, and that's not good.
Well, what's interesting, history will tell you that when we first got here, they were doing 1-year budgets with no projections out, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years. The spending level was about $30 million above what the expenditure, what the income was, and we've the changes that we've made in the environment that we made them were enough to start the infusion that we needed. And do we need to have continuing talks and to talk about new things? Most definitely. We cannot continue on in the same way, and we have to look at a lot of things, but don't think for 1 second that we're not looking at, I'm sorry, something just flew into my eye. I don't know what it was. Don't think for 1 second that we're not looking at those things.
Just when you talk about history a bit, I don't know how many people realize that it wasn't but about 9 or 10 years ago, our general fund was $48 million or $46 million. It was $10 or $11 million more than it is today, just to give you an idea of the spending that went on. And I dare say I'd really hate to go back, because I have, but to go back and see what did we really get for that $46 million. I don't see a lot of evidence.
Well, we lost that was the result of that in lawsuits and
Well, okay,
everything else.
we won't go there.
During the time.
So,
Sorry.
yeah, so the challenge is increase revenues, maybe reduce expenses, and look at those together in some sort of a plan that would cause those blue bars not to get degraded like that. So.
Yeah.
The other part that we still need to go over with you on the utility is to bring in the capital plan. Ed has developed a capital plan which I think addresses a lot of the issues, and he can explain it to you more. But if you're ready for that, we can go ahead and bring that in. So,
Now it gets interesting.
and now we got to figure out how we can show this. Let's leave it at we got to see all the graphs for a moment. And you just have to look at the relationships of them to one another, I think, unless we could hide some of those bars up top, those rows up top. But but what you can see there is in the lower left-hand graph, that's the capital plan. And those bars represent the amount of spending in each year. And in 19, that's going to be mostly existing bond funds. And in 20, it's about 20, how many million is it, Letitia? Tell me, can you know? It's about 25 million that would have to be borrowed. The red bars over here are what you would have to borrow to fund that capital plan. And that brings in new debt service. And we're borrowing each year, but you have a financial advisor who's working on a plan of finance to get a more efficient borrowing plan, to bundle the borrowing so that you can maybe capitalize some interest or backload some debt service and maybe make this a little bit better. But what you can see is happening there is that the reserve balances, when you add capital, go down because your cash outline up there, the orange line, exceeds the black line, which is the cash in. And what you have starting in 2020, whatever that year is up there where the senior lien debt goes yellow, that's your coverage on your debt service. And I don't know how familiar you all are with that, but when you issue bonds, your net income has to exceed your actual principal and interest payments by a certain ratio. If that ratio was 1:0, it would be just enough to pay it.
Right.
And so you can see that that becomes a challenge in these out years to support that debt. Now, with that, I'm going to leave it and let Ed explain to you maybe about what is involved in these projects and you know, the ability possibly to delay or whatever, but I'll turn it over to Ed to talk about that.
Okay, thank you. So if we could just lift that page up a little bit so we can look at the bottom left-hand corner there where it says CIP spending. So the components of the CIP spending, and I would say let's put them for the purpose of this discussion into three buckets. The first bucket I would call that kind of recurring, relatively small capital, minor replacements of trucks or capital tools, miscellaneous equipment, smaller capital projects. The next category after that in terms of size would be our system hardening and reliability improvement project. Those are the projects that we're undertaking aimed largely at the distribution system, not entirely, but largely at distribution to improve our distribution plant. And then the third piece of it would be the transmission plant improvement. And we put those into different buckets in our minds. The transmission plant is a very large, almost a one-time project, which is the building of a second tie line into the city. So if you look at the jump up, the spike up in 20 and 21, in 2020 and 2021, above what you see in the other years, that's the tie line investment, $20 to $22 million total in tie line. The blue bars at the lower level that you see that kind of go out at the lower level through 2025 at this moment, those are largely the other projects, which would be kind of the smaller recurring capital and the system hardening and reliability improvement projects around the distribution system. And then the small numbers that you see in 26, 27, 28, 29, those are as yet undefined projects, but we know that in operating and maintaining and investing in a utility, you're always going to be investing some capital. So it would be disingenuous and almost wrong, definitely wrong, to say capital will be zero in those years. We know that we're going to be sending something in capital, so we modeled in about $2.5 million plus annually to cover some level of capital investment in those years. I think is it 5 million? It's 5 million, closer to 5 million. It should be at least equal to our depreciation. So that number is obviously a little far out. Those projects are not defined, but we know it's not going to be zero. So system hardening and reliability improvement projects, those are the projects that we need to do in our 26 kV and our 4 kV distribution system. Those are the projects that we prioritize in terms of poorest performing circuit first, and then working our way down to the circuits. It involves things like updating and modernizing all of our substations, reducing the number of substations, but changing them to 26 kV where they're not already 26 kV, adding reliability to them, multiple sources of power coming in, and multiple stations that can pick up the load, if you will, if a station fails. So redundancy of equipment. And on the circuits that come out at 26 kV, it's adding things like sectionalizers, reclosers, trip savers, devices like that to improve reliability and the ability to cross-connect circuits in the field in the event that there's a problem with a breaker or a switch back at the substation. For the circuits that come out of these stations at 4 kV, those stations will be upgraded to 26 kV, and then the downstream circuits would be upgraded to 26 kV as well. So one of the benefits of doing that is not only improve reliability, but as we convert circuits from 4 kV to 26 kV, we also get a lowering of expense because we reduce our line losses. So when we transmit volt current or power at a higher voltage, we decrease the current, we reduce our line losses, and we get a little bit of a O&M benefit there. The reliability improvement that goes along with the tie line is greatly improving our reliability so that we don't have the risk of a single tie line failure taking the entire service territory down and having to rely on the power plant, which is well beyond its life already. So those are the basic elements of the capital improvement program. So what we've provided to Stantec more specifically for 2020 and the later years is coming, we've given them the dollars that we expect to be asking for. So we've taken all of the projects and we've laid them out in a schedule that we'd like to execute them at. And we've given them the dollar, if you will, the year in which we were asking to commit those dollars. So for example, we come to you and we ask for a commitment to spend dollars, but the actual checks that get written pursuant to those commitments are going to lag because you're approving that particular portion of the project to start. By the time we order the material and the bill comes in for the material, we order the construction, the labor bill comes in, that's going to lag a little bit. So we're actually developing both schedules, the schedule at which we would ask for the money and the schedule at which we would actually write the checks. Why are those two necessary? Well, it's important for overall financing purpose to understand when we're going to ask the commit dollars and when you would, in theory, approve us to do that. But most secondarily, from a finance point of view, they need to know exactly when that line of credit is going to be used or when that permanent financing will be put in place based on the actual cash flows going out the door. What we want to avoid doing is borrowing money and paying interest on it months, if not years, in advance of actually spending the money, right? We want it to be sequenced well, so we work on both of those schedules. That's a new evolution of how we're going to be planning projects here, but it's quite normal in utility large capital projects to do it that way. So we're providing both schedules. That way, the interest expenses that are built into the budget, so interest on capital shows up as O&M, right? We want to make sure those interest expenses are in the proper years, but even more granularly in the proper quarter of the year in which we expect those expenditures to take place. So that's the level of detail that we're going to.
What do you suspect the interest level has been on the money that we had that was it in the fund that we hadn't spent?
It was the Bank of America loan. What's your question specifically, Madam Mayor?
Meaning that how much interest did we carry on that as opposed to the way this new financing of our capital improvement projects? I mean, like, is that an example of that or no?
That's a bad example, Madam Mayor. That's been around, that loan actually was initiated in 2008. And in 2013, we went to a Bank of America loan. And so the differential between the interest earned on the money versus what was being paid out
That's not a good example.
was not a lot. It's not, yeah, we that's what he's specifically saying we should avoid. In simplest terms.
No, I'm saying that. I'm trying to figure out how much savings we could actually realize
Yeah.
in a dollar for dollar kind of thing by doing it this way as opposed to the way we used to do
The
it.
other advantage of doing it the way he's talking about is delaying the burden on the rate revenues to a certain extent.
Right, no, I understand it completely.
yeah.
I'm just trying to see if I was trying to find an example to give a dollar.
That's where we
Yeah.
can find that information.
Yeah, I'd be
I don't
interested
have-
to see that.
I don't have the dollar numbers, but I'll speak to this issue. Bruce and I are absolutely on the same page on this. We both had the same thought on this, and Bruce is leading our effort in this area. You want me to speak to it? Or?
No,
Well-
I just was trying to get an example of the kind of savings realized
So
by changing our financial way we handle it.
one of by doing this, we'll effectively be borrowing money. This is what we're going to be looking to do, is to use interest-only financing, during the construction of the projects, and then as we complete projects and put those projects in service, convert that to a permanent financing. So think of it as a construction loan on a home, and then your final mortgage, your mortgage that you then carry for the life of the plant. As
Got it.
opposed to taking the entire mortgage up front and saying, yes, I will eventually build that home, I just don't know when, and now you're paying the debt service and the principal, yet you haven't put a shovel in the ground yet.
And just to let you know, in this model, we assume interest only in the first year of each new bond issue.
Okay.
But the FA is going to be working on a more sophisticated schedule to do what he's talking about and to possibly do that over a longer period, where maybe you have interest only for 2 years, maybe 3 years, whereas in this model, it's very difficult to change that year by year.
Okay.
Many of the projects that we'll be rolling out will be 12 to 18 month types of projects. The tie line is a bigger project, so that would have probably a 24-month type of period from the time we say go till the time it's finally in service. So these are not 5, 6, 7, 8 year projects. It'll take 5 to 6 or more years to deploy all of it, but individual components will take shorter periods of time. And then what we'll do is we look at the cost of financing and our ability to pay the debt service. We will then go back, relook at our growth numbers, relook at the projects, and where necessary, move projects out to make sure that we don't get underwater.
Mr. Robinson?
When you were talking about bond issues, we're talking about one bond?
Well, right now,
How many-
each one of those red bars is a separate bond
Sure.
issue, but that's not how it's going to happen. The financial advisor is probably going to bundle at least 2 years of projects together with that kind of financing, probably.
Because individual bonds are expensive in themselves. So
Yeah, that's why you would rather bundle up the years instead of having one every year.
we're talking 3?
Every time you see a red bar in there,
Oh,
it's a
yeah.
borrowing requirement. So if you bundle them every 2 years, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 borrowings over the next 10 years is what it would be. And let me just tell you, everything Ed is saying is really great, and it does push the burden of the initial out just a little bit, but at some point you have the full burden of the debt service. So when you get out into about 24, 25, 26, you can't really do that much anymore because now you're having to have the full burden of the debt service. And you're going the solution of this utility long term is going to be a combination of potentially increased revenues through the growth and development that you're talking about, cost reductions as Ed and his folks continue to look at how they can be more efficient in the utility, and then at some point the potential to have to probably adjust rates at some point in the future. So
Can we go back to the screen that takes it below the income that is normally borrowed? There was a,
Saying scroll up.
yeah, there we go.
the coverage that
2025, we're beginning to get into trouble.
well,
So you're not going to,
if
you're
we can
not
do
going to get a bond in 2025.
if the FA can do what Ed is talking about, for those years 21, 22, we can probably maybe solve that problem there and maybe even a little bit further. At some point, somewhere around 24 or 25, you're going to have the full debt service coming in. So we're going to have some solutions beyond just, the creative financing,
Well, any suggestions on what those solutions might be?
Yes.
I mean,
So what we would do is, and what we're in fact doing is we look 1, 2, 3 years ahead, and by having multiple financings, we can reassess the speed at which we're deploying the projects and slow down on deployment, continue to inspect and reset, inspect and reset. So what we wouldn't want to do is go out there and borrow all of the money today and say, we hope it'll work out. We want to go in measured steps, looking at our continued improvement and reliability, looking at the needs of the system, looking at our competitiveness in the marketplace in terms of what we might be able to do with rates, looking at the growth that we've had, looking at reduction in expenses, all of that together. So we have a very slow, measured approach of going at this.
so we can hope that what you borrow in 21 is going to change the number in 25.
That's certainly going to improve the reliability in 22 and 23 and 24. And then as we see more customer growth, and improve performance, we would be able to then continue with the program. So
if you didn't have more growth and if you didn't have cost cuts and if you didn't have rate adjustments, by 25 or 6, you're going to be at that full debt service on those earlier projects. So it'll help you to get there, but there's going to have to be some other solutions sooner or later in this fund.
We don't know. what
Yeah,
the solution is.
thank you.
Growth.
First of all, could I ask, I see that we have some color coding here. What's an ideal debt coverage ratio for a utility like ours?
That's a really good question. The rating agencies, since the collapse of the financial markets back in the 08 and 09, no matter what your covenant is in your bond covenants, it may be like 1.2 or something like that. They're really looking at wanting to have 1.5 to 2.0 to be able to effectively sell the bonds and be a good investment for the investors. And just to let you know, when that number gets below 1, it's not enough net income to pay the debt service.
Right.
Okay.
You're paying your debt service out of like capital
Borrowed
or reserves or something.
We're borrowing money.
Well, you just can't do it. And that
One at a
that
time.
picture, when you go to the market, which I guess we'll be working with your FA at some point, we got to work with them with this financing to change that picture, because the financial, the credit markets look at the debt service coverage. They look at a lot of things, okay? But the two things they look mostly at are the debt service coverage, and they look at liquidity. So we got to do something about the working capital fund balances, and we got to move things out. We need to have a 5-year forecast for them that will look sellable to, okay? And so we'll be working with the FAs and with Ed for all these different things and come up with a plan that in combination get you a picture that will allow you to get those bonds sold.
Thank you. And I'm really wondering, what if the growth doesn't materialize? This isn't,
It's going to come out of
we're not the
general
first
fund.
people to preface our, financial security on the idea that growth is going to materialize in the future. Some people who made decisions based on the idea that growth is coming, it didn't work out so well. So I'm wondering, what kind of growth, what kind of sub-base growth is baked into, the idea that we could do this.
So this is no different than we would do it at home. So this is a tool to be used for planning.
Right.
This is not the plan,
Sure.
okay? So this is a dynamic model, and we will be working with Stantec on a much more frequent basis than we are today to maintain this model. So this is no different than a wish list that we might make at home in our own homes. We sit down with our partners and we said, okay, what are all the things we'd like to do to this house? I want to repave the driveway, put an addition on, I want a man cave, I want a she shed, all the things that we want to do, right? Want to put a new roof on, I need an air conditioning system. Let's put on a schedule. We say, wow.
Have you been following me?
One of us. I want a new patio. I need to park more cars. I need a bigger fence because I have the boat in the backyard. Well, but
All right, you're not
we think
following
about this. Okay, how are we going to do all this? Well, one of us has to make a lot more money, or we both need to get another, second jobs. So this is the wish list, if you will, and we'd say, okay, for the income that we expect, we've got a gap here. So how's that gap going to be closed? So we either have to defer some of these projects and say, okay, I guess we're not going to get that next thing right in that year. So what we'll do for the first, we're okay for the first couple of years. Then we have to take up and then recheck and say, is that still viable? Are all those things we thought we wanted still able to be achieved at the income we have? Did we get the growth or not get the growth? Things like that.
How many customers do we need? How many customers do we need?
That we can't tell you that right now, but we'll work with them to go into the model and do that. And it's a combination of that.
Are you projecting in this model any revenue growth whatsoever?
1%.
Okay, so how many customers is that? I
Oh,
mean,
we can
that's
tell you
that's
that.
based on sub growth.
I believe that the
215
A year.
a year. So that's 215
New-
utility meters a year.
Right.
Okay. How many additional meters are we actually getting a year in this city, and where are they coming from? And then my next question, again, is kind of back to a land use. Every additional meter we get represents the consumption of land in some way, right? So with 7 square miles that's not growing, every additional meter we get means the diminishment of opportunities to grow meters.
Right.
Unless you densify the city. So how are we thinking about this? How are we thinking about this? Because if we're going to have to, I mean, that's basically saying that we're going to have the equivalent, the impact to the utility of having almost one mid every year?
I think you're all missing one really important part.
That's a question, though.
Oh, sorry.
And I have a few other questions about interest rates and whatnot.
The growth projections that we're using for residential are commensurate with the growth that we've actually been seeing today.
Okay.
Both. And remember that growth doesn't come from just new meters, it comes from existing meters spinning more as well.
Okay.
So the numbers that are in there for residential growth are commensurate with what we've been seeing.
Okay. Now, if we would need more growth than what's baked into this in order to do what we need to do without our debt coverage ratio, without not, we would obviously need a lot more growth than what we have. And I guess, my next question is, what kind of interest rates are baked into this? Because interest rates can go in any direction. I mean, they can go lower, they can
That
go
will
higher.
be, when the FA's put together a plan, they'll have a better sense of that. We're pretty conservative. We're assuming 5%, which is pretty conservative. You can probably do better under this kind of a plan than 5%.
Okay.
But the one thing that somebody, I guess you asked a question, Commissioner Hardy, earlier, maybe it was somebody else, but about the FP&L, are they going to experience increases in their O&M costs? Kind of like
That's where I want to go.
like our
with
blue
this.
line right is there. Almost any utility that operates in the United States has an inexorable, whether they recognize it year by year or not, they have in their rates, they have an inexorable slope to their cost curve. And you did a really great thing to get on parity with FP&L, but at some point you're going to probably need to get back into having.
That's exactly
level.
what I've been trying to say. I was trying to get my words in here.
I've been following you around.
I know. No, what I was trying to say is, unlike most of the charts that you bring before us in the very beginning, there are zeros on this one.
Right.
Every other one that we look at, from stormwater and everything else that we look at, has numbers built in there. So before everyone gets all gloom and doom, when we no one led the cry. I was one of a few that led the cry here for rate parity and to get there. But once we're there, we're not so stupid to think that you don't have a cost increase or cost of living increase every year in regards to what your operations are and your services are. It was to get us to the starting point so that we can compete. It was not to say that this is how we know FB&L's rates are going to go up, and because their costs are going to go up. And just the same as our rates will need to go up as our costs go up, but we will still maintain. It was about being competitive, not about being less than or this or that. I mean, in many regards. And I get that. So I don't want to say, but this is the only chart we've ever had that has no numbers in it. So no rates have been structured and there no increases have been formulated. And no, like we knew with water, it said what, 5% or whatever. We had to look at the 5% increase every year for X amount of years or whatever. So we need to build that in here too, and not to. And we've been afraid to talk about it because we've had a job to do and we had an ordinance to meet to get to that rate parity, and we fought like hell for it. But now that we're here, I understand that there's a cost to operate a business, but we just have to be able to compete against our competitors.
And if I may just, to your point earlier, real quickly, you said what growth would we need to solve the problem? Well, you can't get enough growth to solve the problem. The problem is going to have 4 stools really. It's going to have to be growth. It's going to have to be efficiency in O&M. It's going to have to be looking at, as Ed was saying, as you get experience, possibly parsing out some of your capital projects, and then possibly some level of rate adjustments along the way.
Correct.
So
So, I'm sorry, City Manager, you had something to add.
And you all have all kind of hit on all the points. This is a very conservative model, to your point, Mayor, and it has a lot of conservative numbers baked in it because it's important for us to approach it from that standpoint. To Commissioner Hardy's question about what is the right number, and I think Michael kind of hit on it. It's a combination of things, but when you shift over to the general fund side and actually say physically in the environment, the built environment, how many units and what kinds of units are we short, that is something we're actively working on right now to bring to y'all, to have that and facilitate that discussion so that you then can say, well, why aren't people coming here, and then what are the things we have to invest in to fix? And you can go down that list so that we can have a chance at building those units. But I can't give you a number right now how many we're short.
I was just going to say that was why I asked the question. You see a bunch of zeros up there, and I get that. And I get that we have parity, which is why I asked, what's FP&L doing?
Yeah. Right, that's why I brought them into the mix in the very beginning of the conversation, because I was trying to show the history to the current of what we did and why we're doing it and why, because just people don't understand that, because we talk about rate parity and people still to this day don't think we're rate parity, you know, that we're within the exact range of it, and they still don't even know that, let alone, you know, then all they'll say is, oh, they're raising the rates, they're going to have to raise the rates, and they don't realize they've been paying the cheapest rates they've ever paid in decades. But, Vice Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Not to drag this on much further, I was surprised to hear you say that customer growth in and of itself won't solve itself, because the question I was going to ask is, could you drop it at 5%?
Can we drop what?
Drop a 5% growth in there just for laughs?
Yeah, we can do that. We can
Just
see
for
maybe.
laughs and giggles to see how that moves the needle?
Yeah, I was speculating that it wouldn't, but we can see what
Right.
would 5% do
Just, that would be.
for every year.
Every year.
So what,
But let's save the graph till last. Hey, before you guys do it, save it till last so we can see what difference it makes. They're going to do this to bring the green bars next to the blue bars, and they'll stay constant, and then we'll be able to show you the difference it makes.
I'm just kind of curious. I know that's huge bump.
I kid you
so
not.
while we're doing that and the model
It's
is
a huge
cooking,
number of people too.
I just wanted to add, if we go back and look at, because we've been keeping track of this the last
larger
3
the
years of total salaries, for example, we've actually held the line or decreased. So, and we did all of that while negotiating and implementing well-earned increases for our staff, particularly our IBW linemen, who we wanted to get as close to the competition as we could. So we're doing some great things in reducing our discretionary spending to hold the line and be able to deliver on that rate parity promise. So what we're going to be doing going forward, we talk about this being a living model. You're doing exactly the types of exercises that we do and say, gee, if we tried to get it all back in growth,
Right.
what would that look like? If we thought we needed rate increases, what would that look like? It had to be O&M decreases, or if we decrease the contribution general fund, what would that look at?
Right.
So it would have been disingenuous to come in here and say, there's only one thing we can do, and that's to, do A or B or C or D. It's really going to be a blend of all of the above, and it's going to be situational on an every 1 to 2 to 3 year look ahead basis. So we don't want to lock in a plan and say, well, we made the plan, move on, it's done, it's baked. This is a living thing, and we'll be addressing as we go, and we'll be modifying our spending, not just O&M, but also our capital spend to match what we can really afford to do. The overall goal is to stay as close as possible to parity. We are currently in the top quartile, top 25% for our 1,000 kilowatt hour customer in the state in terms of lowest rates, not the highest rates. We're in that top quartile, according to the FMEA survey, and we want to stay there. So we need to balance all of these things to come up with the best mix of solutions. So to put one print plan up here and said it's a PDF, it's not adjustable, that would have been wrong, right? So this helps you understand what we're doing and how we're going to be using this modeling. So
It's a decision support process, is
I'm
right.
sorry.
I think
Let's see 1%.
so. What you'll
5% ain't too good.
Well, and to your point, Ed, and that's the beauty of the Stantec modeling. I don't think we need to be alarmed at this point, but I think we need to continue doing the things we're doing, continue the focus, continue to sharpen our pencil, as I like to say. And I think we're going to get there. But I think at the end of the day, after we leave this room tonight for this particular workshop, as I said earlier, and I think Commissioner Hardy echoes my sentiments, we're going to ask some tough questions and have difficult conversations about what we're going to do to fix and grow the middle class in this community. And that needs to be our biggest objective right now. We need to put our heads together and have that conversation. The last thing I want to ask, and because
We're going to see the numbers?
well, they're up there.
Yeah.
So
The,
it's
the-
a much
the blue
brighter
bars are
picture.
with the high growth.
Where's the 5%?
It's the blue bars.
Yeah.
Okay, the reserve balances are better, and they go further before they go down.
Sure.
Than in the green bars. The green bars are with the 1%. And the senior lien coverage up there,
Yeah,
it's stronger too. I
Yeah.
mean, if you look at the last plan in 2021, it was
0.9.
one,
Oh, yeah.
and it was 181. So you can see the difference there. It's a little bit stronger in each of those years.
right.
And it doesn't really turn completely south until way on out in the forecast. You're still above 1.0,
Right,
for longer. So it did help. Now,
That's 5%?
that's fine.
that's 5%. And Commissioner Hardy, you asked the question about what do we do if growth doesn't occur? I mean, and that's a really great question. You have more choices in this fund than you do the general fund if growth doesn't occur. You have more tools that you can play with over here. So you keep that in mind when you're looking at the two funds together. Yeah.
And the last question, Madam Mayor, and I promise not to ask another question unless we want to keep going. But I think Commissioner Hardy asked earlier about the bonds and the timing, whether it's 1 or 2 years grouped together. You know, my understanding is there is a significant amount of cost in issuing a bond in terms of lawyer fees, advertising, all the good stuff that you got to do. And I'm quite sure you all factored that into this when you looked at the.
Each year we factor those costs in, and when you get a more efficient plan, you won't have as many of those borrowing costs as we have in here right now.
Right.
When you group them together.
Yeah, that's my fear is we probably could save a chunk of money by bundling as much as possible.
Some of the costs are the per bond, but some of the costs are per bond issue. Okay, so it will be less.
Commissioner Hardy?
And I just want to say, this assumes that the previous plan assumes that the electric utility is going to save an extra $300,000 every year by reducing the amount, which is not a decision that we have made.
No, but you haven't. But it does assume that. I mean, like we said, it's a decision support model. It shows you your different decision alternatives and what the consequences are, and that's what it's doing right now.
And so, can we see what this fund looks like without this 5% annual increase in sub-base and without the extra $300,000?
1%. Leave the 300,000.
Leave the $300,000 in.
Yeah.
So while they're cooking on the model, I'll also say that this,
As in, leave it show that it continues to come from the electric fund to the general fund.
Instead of the general.
Okay, right.
He withdraws the
as
word
they're,
cooking.
as they're working on the model. So this is not going to be the type of plan where we set it and forget it.
Right. Sure.
Commissioner Robinson
Yeah.
is a sailor. He knows you don't set the sail and forget about it for the rest of the day. You retrim it for new circumstances. So we'll be doing that. So what you get from me on a quarterly basis at our quarterly financial review. So during those quarterly meetings, I report out onto you now performance relative to budget. So we'll know where we set the budget, and no less than quarterly, you'll be getting a report from me on how we're doing on that journey. And as we're progressing down that path, if we see things that need to be adjusted, we will adjust.
So I just want to be clear. What this shows is the fund.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm sorry. I just want to be clear that what this shows is the fund with 1% annual sub-base growth and that $300,000 that we had discussed. Right. Going, not coming from the general fund to the electric fund, but going from the electric fund to the general fund.
Well, it's staying at the same level, so we had the electric fund pays the 4.8
Right.
million, whatever.
And it just stays.
No
reduction.
Right.
It's not being reduced by 300.
Okay.
Nor is the general fund being affected by that. And the green bars are what it was with the 1% growth with the 300 being taken out. Okay, and now it's back in, so you can see that it's a bigger burden on the utility, and the fund balances go lower sooner. That's because the cash flow is not as strong.
I was asking to see a rate increase across on the form, not a growth increase.
Oh, he was asking.
You just got to ask for a sub-base
The
growth.
sub-base growth, I was asking for a rate.
Yeah, let's do 1% a year, that'd be cool.
If you
Well,
did one,
do
if
you want to
put-
do that before he has an opportunity to refine the plan with regard to the capital and the O&M and all that?
Well, I think
At this
that it'll work in conjunction with that, but I'd like to see it. What 1% does, does it matter? I mean, you've got to figure if there's going to be if there's 5% across the board in
Do you
water,
want-
there
do
would
you
be
want
at
to-
least 1%.
Madam Mayor, do you want to see it on this set of assumptions, or do you want to see it with the 300,000 coming out of the transfer?
With the 300,000 coming out, because that's what we're going to be
So
looking
let's
at.
go back to
correct?
that.
Is that? I
That's
mean, we
correct.
haven't
We can see it
decided.
both ways.
That's the recommendation.
Yeah.
You can see it both ways.
Where are we gonna get that 300?
And again, we would all, of course, balance that and trying to maintain our position with parity.
When do we do
So
the
it-
general?
We'd have to be very, very careful
2021.
about how we do that.
Wait a minute.
if we
Don't
do
do
it.
anything. What would you
I
like?
was saying that that would mirror what the industry increases, that if our peers or whatever, or we have any increases in it, that we would still maintain parity while watching
What would you,
those
what would you like to see? What would you like to see, Madam Mayor?
1%?
When you start it in 2021,
Yes.
okay, each year, and it'll apply to, across the board, it'll be an overall revenue increase. Okay. Yeah. You can see that 1% didn't do very much.
No.
It got us from 25 to 26 in bonding. Well, no, why does it?
It moved out.
That's with taking the
Yeah.
300 out.
It's de minimis.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, let's see it without taking the 300,
It's de minimis.
please.
You like that?
I'm sorry. That sounds so bossy.
You're out of the box.
Mayoral.
Still can't forget my pleases.
I don't know, have you done it?
Yeah, I think there was a little bit more fund balance.
Is that the kind of coffee at Starbucks? The strap of on town?
The sheriff.
No?
That works.
What's the difference between 26 and 27?
One.
Even I know that.
It's 0.6.
Math was my good.
I knew that.
I knew that one right off the bat.
No, what
That
is
was brilliant.
why?
It doesn't change much at all.
No, ma'am.
The 300,000 doesn't even,
You're putting
Why
a
the
lot of
whole
debt
year?
service early on in this
26.
new debt service, so
There, on the
1%
red line.
doesn't do much.
no.
What creates that?
Have to be more, it's probably gonna have to be more in the first few years than
ratio.
later years.
All right, so I just want to see.
Hmm?
In 2021, put 3%, 22, 3%, 23, 3%, 2%, 24, 2%, 25, and leave ones.
You didn't get 2 and 25.
It's gonna, they're
What?
pulling from each year.
22 and 26.
Can you,
Still not great.
I mean, You're reducing the rate at which the fund balance goes down, but it, like we said, it's gonna be a solution that's got multiple parts and a little bit
Right.
complicated.
Okay. Anything else?
And once the financial, just one last thought, once the financial advisors get the financial numbers that we have now, and then they can craft their plan of finance, we can put those numbers back in, and then it would be more constructive to do what you're doing,
Okay,
to try to figure that out, because we would have the relief of pushing some of that burden out some.
gotcha.
Yeah.
So now the big crazy one's gonna be look at the general fund again, in reference to the.
Go.
Commissioner Hardy.
Can we talk about the nature of these capital projects again?
will you explain the 23,
They would appear
2026?
to be necessary. Which and you know, they appear to be things that should have been done 10, 15 years ago.
Or more.
Or more, right? And so, while you know we talked about the four legs of the stool, you know you have two sides of the revenue coin: volume or sub base, or and rates. You know, which is you know the price of the you know that our customers pay. And then on the other side, you have O&M efficiency, which is tough when on the labor side, our guys are still you know underpaid relative to our competitor, which we kind of acknowledge, at least our linemen are, which we kind of acknowledge that we'll never get there, but it's still kind of something that we should always you know. But then you know you get the last one was spreading out the capital projects so that they have a smaller impact on an annual basis. We've deferred them already. Right? And so, in your opinion, can we provide the level of service that our customers deserve while spreading out these capital projects? And one of them the tie line is like something that, I mean, it has to be done. You can't like spread that over 5 years.
Well, the answer is we can greatly improve our level of service. The tie line benefits every single customer. Then as
Right.
you improve, then you get into distribution. As you improve individual circuits, you greatly improve their performance. So since we're starting with the poorest performing circuits first and our best performing circuits last, we expect the largest impact to overall reliability to come in the first handful of projects on the distribution side, the West 13, the West 05, those particular circuits. And that's where the initial investments in distribution really are. And then the rest come later on. The benefit when you get into the 4 kV is, of course, you're getting a savings as well because you're reducing your line losses. And one could argue that as you reduce outages, you also increase your sales because you're still delivering product to your customer and you haven't annoyed them by having shut them off because the breaker failed or the wire came down or the bird took the circuit out.
So how would you, I guess, spread out? You know, I mean, like the tie line is not something that you can spread out. I mean, it's a project that you would probably want to complete as quickly as possible.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, but that's the biggest.
That's the single biggest project. All the
right.
other projects are going to be, $1 to $3 or $4 million. That's the big one at 20 plus.
Right, so you can't spread that out.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's the one that has the greatest urgency because it has significant savings associated with it as well.
Right, and also not to mention, reliability in a really huge sense. If there's like a major event, there's another tie line that can.
Correct.
Okay.
And the way we would actually operate is both of them would be in service all the time.
Okay.
And either one can pick up the full load and very quickly.
Are there, and I believe everything should be on the table all the time. I think we should constantly be reevaluating our assumptions. And I'm going to preface this by saying I recently read an article about something that's happening in another city in the state of Florida that has their own municipal electric utility, that being the city of Jacksonville. Are there options that involve us, the city, not being in the utility business, that would solve this, some of these issues? Should we consider privatizing the utility to some extent? And forgive, I'm touching a third rail here, but I think it's important to have discussions about all options. So, I think we should discuss all possibilities. And so if it's a dumb idea, I think it should be said in public that it's a dumb idea and we should explain why. But I don't see a reason in not touching it because somebody touched it before and got burnt. That's not what leaders do.
Madam Mayor.
I would like to.
I would like to hear an answer to that.
Why don't you go next?
I want to help.
Well, to be respectful, I won't respond and say it's a dumb idea, but I will say it's a good question to ask. The projects that we are focused on are projects that need to be done regardless of who owns this utility.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I'll use a lot of analogies. If we were talking about adding something that nobody else would have any use for, then we wouldn't get value out of it in a sale.
Right.
Adding just in our homes. Let's go add a whole bunch of other stuff when we know whoever buys the place is going to not want it anyway. So we put money in, we can't get it out.
Sure.
The projects that we're investing in are projects that somebody else would have to do anyway, that need to be done. So if we don't do them, the value of the asset is less than it would be if we do them. So my view is let's do these anyway. Let's not wait to provide this service level that our customers deserve. So let's move ahead. The decision to keep it or sell it, that can be made at any time down the road. Doesn't have to be made now. But these are things that we can afford to start with. Let's start with them. Somebody would have to pay for them anyway. It's either going to come out of out of our constituency now in providing that service level, capital investment, or it's going to show up as a decreased value if the asset were in fact to be sold. Now, the complexity of trying to liquidate an asset such like this is so extreme and so lengthy in the number of years and what it would take to accomplish that just looking at the recent one that took place, Vero,
Yeah.
we can't wait that number of years to start on this process, say to our customers, salvation is coming at some point down the road, trust us. We need to start on that now. And anybody who did buy it would have to go and get up to speed and then deploy these projects anyway. It would just postpone the inevitable, which is it has to be done. Swapping out ownership, swapping out management, swapping out labor, that's not going to solve the problem. We need to start now.
Okay.
Vice Mayor Pro Tem?
And I just wanted to say, we've already gone down that road. There was a time where I thought it'd be, that we should just, we couldn't manage the function well, and we should get rid of it. But we've learned, we've had the consultants, we've had the UAB, we've learned that it's virtually impossible. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's virtually impossible for us to jettison this asset and make out on the closing end of it. So, and I think a lot of people in our community have come to realize that as well. There's been a learning curve that we all benefited from the exercise that we went through here some 4 or 5 years ago. So as much as it might feel good to have somebody else have all the headaches, the reality of it is it's not going to be economically beneficial if we could even do it, to do it.
Mr. Harney?
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that. What I would say is, when those two studies were performed by two different financial companies, I think back in 2014, obviously the assumptions that were put into those are very different than they are today. And so, what I would say is because in 2014 it might not have made sense, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that we should not at least consider in 2019 or in 2024 or in 2029. And so, I'm not saying that it's something that we should do, but when I solve problems in my personal life, I try to keep all options open, and I think that's what people should do. So I appreciate that. But again, I understand that lots of questions were asked and answered years ago before I got here. It's just something. It's a question to ask. That's all.
No, I think it's a good question. I don't mind you at all asking these questions, and I think we should always ask the questions. I was very much for that when I first got here. Looking at it, and then I learned a lot about the system, and I learned a lot about what it does and how it works and where it goes, and the investments that were made and why they were made, and I learned a lot. And I appreciate and admire our folks so much more than when I got here because I didn't understand anything, and now I get it. I think it's good to ask those questions. I think that's one of the reasons why I brought up the whole thing in the beginning about FBNL was to talk about being competitive and being at rate parity and all those things. But also one of the big problems back then was how inflated it was and how much money the general fund was taking. The city, was taking to prop up that general fund, and how much they were charging to get that money because they were really taking a lot of money for it. And what I've always wanted us to do is to be able to, regardless of what happens, hey, we're all going to be gone someday, and other people will be here and sitting and making decisions. I want to make sure that the organization is healthy, meaning that whenever a decision is made, whatever decision is made in regards to that, that's why I wanted the rate parity for the competitive purposes, but also the fact of when I was asking about the franchise fees and things like that, that general fund and our city can operate intelligently and effectively in a way that they would be if they were, receiving a franchise fee and not operating its own. Either way, we should be operating in a professional manner that's respectful of our shareholders, our customers, and of the entire organization. And we should be operating as professionals no matter what we do. And I'm proud to say that we've got a hell of a team, and we're doing that now. And we're doing that. But we have to be competitive in the market, and we have to be, charging what we're supposed to be charging. And we understand that we have to do. We are a city that runs on that and needs that now. And that's where the challenge is going to be now. Learning how do we do that without but we have to wean ourselves off of it. We've always known that we've had to wean the general fund off the electric utilities. We've known that. People that have staff has been here for a long, long time. We've known that, and we have to be healthy. And I know that these discussions that we're having about all different things are meant to make us healthy.
And just one more thing, that analysis that was done in 2014 showed that the main reason not to do it was that the value to an outsider was smaller than the value to the city. But as the city weans itself off of money from the electric utility, the value to the city of the electric utility actually decreases over time. So again, that was the rationale in 2014. The rationale today might be, the same ultimate decision, but maybe for different reasons, right? That's all possible, and I appreciate that. You remind people of the history of kind of where things were, and kind of give people a picture as to where we're going. I just always think we should be thinking about every.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you on thinking about the future. I just don't like people think that we make decisions they're just coming out of thin air, and I just thought that up. I like to see, for them to understand, and then eventually we won't have to refer to history, because people will understand it all.
So let me add to that, based on my experience in the utility industry for a while now, having also been involved with M&A activities, both in acquiring and divesting of assets to the extent that it's applicable to public sector. When you look at assets and make a determination as to whether you want to buy them, and in this case you want to retain them, you look at a few things. One, is it core to my mission? Two, is it profitable? Three, can it be made profitable if it's not? And if it is profitable, can it be made more profitable? Can the return on invested capital exceed my current return on invested capital? Is it accretive to the overall enterprise? Those are all hard, cold financial measures. What I would say here is it goes a bit further in the public sector, right? The story of this utility, while it contributes to the general fund and will still be contributing to the general fund well into the future, it's also part of the story that makes Lake Worth a place that people would want to come to, right? We can say that under our current plan, we will be 55, 58% carbon free in our power supply by 2024. I'm not aware of any other investor-owned utility that can make that claim for its population. That's a differentiation. That is, I believe, part of the fabric and part of the story of Lake Worth Beach, that we can in fact do that. And we're doing that through this large commitment, not only existing commitment to nuclear, but the large commitment we're making for 40 plus megawatts of solar going
That's what I
forward.
wanted to ask you. Is that factored in?
Yes,
The rates that will be?
yes, that's in the wholesale power cost. So
That is, okay.
if I were looking at from a strictly financial point of view, I listed the measures we would look at. And then when I look at how it weaves into the overall story of the city, it makes sense to have it. Now, our modelers showed our O&M. If we were losing and bleeding cash, I'd say we got a huge problem. We're not. We're talking about how are we going to layer in the capital improvements we want to make for the purpose of putting stuff in the ground and up in the air, hard physical assets, not things that'll be gone next year or the year after. Not excessive spending on things that we don't need and disappear. It's in the asset, it's in the fabric. And I think there's also an element, having come from the investor-owned community, utility world, that people here, they know their linemen. They know the people that come by to check on the meters. They know people in the electric utility. There's a different feel to that. And that's part of, I think, what people value here that would not exist. Now, how do you put a dollar number on that? That's a hard one to do. But in terms of what the city's looking for, I believe that the asset, certainly for the foreseeable future, is one that we should continue to invest in and continue to grow, and not necessarily say, is it time to get rid of it? We are adding more value to the city. And for every dollar we put in, we're going to get a lot more value out in terms of customer satisfaction.
More presentation? All right,
No,
I'll
ma'am,
entertain
that's
a
it.
motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Okay. Is there a second?
Second?
Is there a second? Please.
want to keep meeting. Oh, there you go.
All those in favor state so by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. You guys.
You're weak.
Much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Commissioners.